For a lot of folks, the original Hummer was the ultimate in excess, the ultimate in conspicuous consumption. And I can see some of those shoppers, even though this resurrected Hummer is a full zero emissions vehicle, being really interested because this Hummer is the ultimate something else. This is the ultimate expression of what an electric vehicle could do off-road, at least for now. The resurrected Hummer is undoubtedly conspicuous, but this time it's consuming electricity, not gasoline. So zero tailpipe emissions, range on this model of over 320 miles, nearly 330 miles, but one of the biggest battery packs ever assembled in the world outside of an electric semi. Almost 16 inches of ground clearance, nearly 3 feet of water fording ability. This is the ultimate off-road truck. But it's also the ultimate performance truck because this will go 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds if you have access to the right tires and the right road service. Even on these all-terrain tires, this is a 0 to 60 vehicle of around 3 seconds, and that is absolutely insane. But let's talk about the rest of the Hummer first. Up front, you can see that we have this very distinctive LED light module. It's actually multiple modules here, spell out Hummer. Each module has its own little letter there, but the headlights, they're actually down a little bit lower on the bumper. Speaking of the bumper, this is a plastic bumper up front, although we do have metal members lower down there. So right there on the skid plate, the metal tow hook, recovery hooks right there, but all the plastic right here, these are all plastic surrounds. At 86.7 inches wide without the mirrors, this is definitely a wide pickup, but not the entire body has been widened. The front fenders right here, those bulge out quite a lot from the body, but then things duck back in for the front doors and then they pop back out for the rear fenders. The new Hummer truck is definitely wide, but it's not as long as some people had feared. It's just under 217 inches in length. That means lengthwise, this is going to fit in a lot of urban parking stalls, but the width, that could be a little bit tricky. To help this out on trails, someplace that is pretty tricky to go in something like a power wagon or a new Tremor, we have rear wheel steering, and that makes a big difference, as you'll see in this video. Rear wheel steering, of course, isn't new, and it's not even new to GM pickup trucks. They tried it a while back with Quadra-Steer, but this system is a little bit different. It's a little bit more aggressive at steering the rear wheels. Actually, I should say a lot more aggressive at steering the rear wheels, especially if you're in the off-road modes of this vehicle's mode selector. If you're in off-road, the rear wheels steer a little bit less aggressively than the front, but if you're in the terrain mode, the rear wheels actually steer more than the front. So it's a 1 to 1.2 ratio for steering, and you'll really notice that out on the trail. The rear end will actually start swinging out and steering more aggressively than the front. It's a really interesting feature. The four-wheel steering system doesn't just make this turn tighter, it also enables the signature feature of the Hummer EV, which is, of course, the crab walk feature. This does have some uses off-road, but also logically, it's just pretty darn cool to show off to your friends. Here's how it works. In crab walk mode, which you can enable with a button in the center console, the wheels are going to turn in the same direction. So right now, they're both turning to the left. But if I wanted to drive that direction, well, the vehicle is still pointed that direction. I can do that in crab walk. All I have to do is turn the steering wheel. Let's see here. Now they're about straight, so I'll turn the wheel for the maximum in crab walk mode. And here's how it goes. The width of the Hummer EV is perhaps a little bit less noticeable out back. We get full LED tail lamps there, the multi-pro tailgate that we first found in the GMC Sierra, so I can lower it like a regular tailgate right there. Then I can hunt around for the other button and lower this section. This will turn into a step if I want it to. I just have to pop that little bit down there. There's also a kicker audio system inside. The new Hummer is the first vehicle to be built on GM's new highly scalable Ultium platform of battery electric vehicles. This battery electric vehicle family is going to span from super trucks like this that are absolutely insane and truly enormous to much smaller Cadillacs and even an Acura, because Honda has actually penned an agreement with General Motors for them to be building Acura. So they're not licensing the technology to Acura. Interestingly enough, General Motors will actually be building those vehicles on the same bones, basically, that we see in the Hummer EV, just scaled up and scaled down. There's been a lot of confusion about whether this is a unibody vehicle or a body-on-frame vehicle. This is a battery-in-body vehicle, I guess you could say, because the entire body is welded together. The subframes front and rear bolt onto that body that is all welded together, and the battery is inserted from underneath. And the battery tray likely does confer some structural rigidity to the vehicle, but also the unibody confers a lot of structural rigidity. That means that this is quite different than the upcoming F-150 Lightning because there's no seam right back here, and that's why it has this particular design element here to help strengthen things back there for the bed. Now, some people poo-poo this. Personally, to me, it does not matter because you definitely want a very rigid structure for off-roading, and that is exactly what this body design gives the new Hummer. But there is a possibility that it also gives the Hummer its incredible curb weight. This model's door sticker says its curb weight is over 9,200 pounds. Now, a lot of that definitely has to do with the battery. This entire black section right down here, just about, is the battery pack location in the vehicle. It spans from just in front of the rear tire to just behind the front tire, and it's a double stacked battery pack. The usable capacity of this battery pack, according to EPA filings, is about 212 kilowatt hours. Now, at this point, I should say that there are a decent number of specifications that GM has not released yet. So for instance, I don't have official legroom or headroom numbers inside, and they won't tell us exactly how big the gross capacity of the battery pack is. Some specifications are a little bit secret at the moment. But we do know that the EPA range on this model is 329 miles, and that does include these pretty knobbly all-terrain tires that this model has on it. And that also makes this one of the least efficient EVs you can buy in America. At launch, the Hummer is only going to be available in a 3-motor setup. There are 3 identical motors, 2 in the rear and 1 up front, each producing just over 333 horsepower to give you a total of 1,000 horsepower and 1,200 pound-feet of torque. A little bit later, there's also going to be a dual-motor version, and then at some point later than that, there will be less powerful dual-motor versions. To help improve off-roading, the dual motors in the back don't have a physical connection between the two of them, but in software they can act sort of like a locked differential. Now, to improve off-roading even further, the front differential, that actually has a real locker on it. The twin electric motor setup in the back also gives this torque vectoring capabilities off-road and on-road, but it likely adds to the curb weight, which again is over 9,200 pounds in this model. It also likely adds to the relative inefficiency. At 47 mpge, according to the EPA, this is one of the least efficient ways to roll on electricity. And that's why this battery is significantly larger than the battery that we find in the new F-150 Lightning. Even though it gives you about the same range, you'll get 9 more miles of range in this with the over 200 kilowatt hour usable battery here versus about 320 miles, just 9 less in the F-150 Lightning with an approximately 131 kilowatt hour battery. So if you're worried about electricity consumption, you might want to consider something a little bit more efficient, or you might want to wait until more efficient versions of this come available. The charging specs are a little bit of give and take because this may be one of the fastest DC fast charging vehicles on the planet, but when it comes to AC level 2 charging, the kind of charging that more people are going to be doing more often, this is not as fast as some. It has an onboard 11.5 kW charger. That means it will take 21 hours to completely charge this battery if it was completely flat, even if you had access to the fastest level 2 charger, say at home or at the office. That means if you want to roll in at night with a dead battery and you want to roll out the next day with a completely full battery, it's going to have to be nearly a full day later. On the other hand, you could roll into a DC fast charge station, spend 30 to 40 minutes there, and then top off the rest of it at night at home. As many people expect out of an EV, the Hummer has a front trunk and it has a nice feature, which is a power front trunk. If I can find the little button, there it is right there. Once you get used to it, you'll know where it is. This is a complete power mechanism, so it's not just a power unlatch. And here we find a front trunk that's a little bit smaller than the one in the F-150 Lightning. That mainly seems to have to do with the way that they have designed the front structures here for the suspension, those suspension towers, etc., the headlight modules, everything like that's going on the sides. Now in this model, the front trunk is entirely filled with these little boxes here. These are the boxes that you use to store the T-top on this vehicle. We have one little compartment for each of the panels, and then they stack up right like that in the front trunk. Obviously, if you'd rather just use the front trunk for storage, you can just take these out and leave them at home. And then, interestingly enough, they give us these little straps here. They're not ratchet straps, they're pull straps, so that way things aren't rolling around when you're off-roading. Over a day of driving, I found the driver's seat and the front passenger seat to be pretty comfortable. This is the top end trim, keep that in mind. So we do have 4-way adjustable lumbar on both the front passenger and the driver's seats, 2-position memory over there for the driver, and we have a power tilt telescopic steering column. Now, rather unfortunately, Hummer has not released a lot of interior dimensions, which is a little bit surprising, so let's talk about how roomy it feels. Between my head and this bar that runs right there across the ceiling, I have about an inch left if I'm sitting in a very natural seating position. If I want to be a little bit closer to the floor, I can expand that out to about 2 inches. Jumping into the back seat, we have plenty of room. Not quite as much room as some of the largest pickup truck cabs, but still very, very generous. One thing I noticed is that the seat bottom cushion is a little bit closer to the ground. It's likely that the body is a little bit shorter in terms of its overall height than some pickup truck cabs. If I put my head back to the headrest here, I have about ½ an inch of headroom left, and that all has to do with the way this T-top roof is designed. Even though the exterior is wide for a pickup truck, the interior is approximately the same width as a regular Silverado 1500. So right here in the middle position, there is tons of room next to me. You could easily put rear-facing child seats, 3 child seats, or 3 adults across the rear, etc. But you will notice that headroom is a little bit limited. If I sit upright in the middle, my head does touch the ceiling. Move over to the right side, the seat is a little bit bucket-shaped, and again, I have that same amount of headroom that I had before. The storage area under the seats is not lockable, but this is where we find the Can-A-Fix-A-Flat and the tire inflator, because again, this vehicle does not come standard with a spare. The ones in the rear are accessories. If I lower the seat down, you'll notice we have a little bit of storage space right there in the 2 rear seat backs. It's kind of a handy touch. We then have that fold-down center armrest with 2 cup holders, and we have a power sliding rear window. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are inside an Edition 1 trim. Up here we find the controls for the OnStar system, the control for that sliding rear window, rear view camera right there, and then we find these translucent plastic panels on the roof. They do have kind of a bluish tint to them. They block UV and regular sunlight, but it does get a little bit warm in here. Now, as I said before, all these panels are removable. You can take out these 4 panels, pop them right there in the trunk. You can also take off the crossbar up front here. You actually have to undo these bolts here and then these bolts right in there. Then you can take off this crossbar for a truly open-air experience. Now, if you were hoping for a Wrangler-like experience where the front window folded down, you will be a little bit disappointed. Moving all the way back to the rear, you can see that sliding rear window right there, and you can also see the way that that support beam crosses the rear and why rear headroom is a little bit more limited than you might think. It does have that bar right there for extra structural rigidity. The driver and front passenger get height adjustable shoulder belts. You can see that we have the Hummer EV logo right there in the middle of that rear seat back. The seat back and seat bottom cushion are perforated because these are both heated and ventilated. We have plenty of soft touch materials going on the front doors and on the dashboard with an Edition 1 logo right there on the passenger side. One thing that struck me interesting, this dashboard is probably going to be a little bit difficult to keep clean if you do plan on off-roading your vehicle very regularly. Lots of dust ends up in all the crevices. But that said, I do really like this interior design. It looks really modern and elegant. Over here on the passenger side, we have a pretty typical glove box for a pickup truck. It is a little on the small side. I don't think I could fit a large tablet computer inside, but unlike other trucks, there's no secondary glove box over there. Now, in the middle of everything, we have an approximately 13-inch color touchscreen LCD. General Motors is the latest car company to use Google's Android-based operating system for their infotainment system. But this software, although the core version of it is related to what we find in Polestar and Volvo models, is by far the best implementation of Google's OS. And I think this really demonstrates what can be done with Android running your car's infotainment software. Over in settings, we can choose home charge location notifications. This is really cool. We can have it precondition the battery for DC fast charging. And as we see in Teslas, conditioning will begin automatically if you've added a DC fast charge station to your navigation route. So that is really, really handy. And that means that we should now go along to the mapping interface and see exactly how this does. Navigate me to San Jose, California. As with other Google connected systems, voice recognition is really smooth. It's very easy to understand. It supports natural language. And of course, as we see in other EVs that use this same system, the routing is going to be based on this vehicle's charging preferences and profiles there. You can see it has pretty decent range. So right here, it knows that we need charging. So we simply choose the add charging here. Now it's going to go ahead and add them. See exactly what it has up its sleeve. And it's going to take 15 hours, 30 minutes, including charging. There's all these various Electrify America stations here right there. And it knows how long it's going to take you to charge. So 45 minutes charge there, an hour-long charge there, 1 hour, 1 minute right there, because it probably wants you to go completely full. This one's just a pretty quick 19-minute charge to kick it on over there into stop 2. Below the climate control row of buttons, there's another row of buttons. This is where we find the heated steering wheel, the e-locker in the rear, front and rear lockers right there, traction control. If you want to engage the watts to freedom mode, that's a double click and hold of that button. And then we get this screen on the infotainment system. And this is where I should say that animations here are really great. Once that mode's enabled, it'll change the instrument cluster over here to the watts to freedom mode. We then say OK over here. It's going to precondition the battery if it needs to. It's going to lower the vehicle. Right now you can see that it's lowering right now. We'll see if the battery is warm enough. I actually have to say that this vehicle is pretty quick as far as bringing the battery into condition for using this watts to freedom mode, which is the fast acceleration mode again. In fact, it actually probably takes longer to lower the vehicle than it does to actually start it here. And so now you can see it's in standby, so it's basically ready for us. Back over to the center part of the dashboard, we have 2 big air vents there, Qi wireless charging mat. There is a lid for that area. USB inputs for the infotainment system. It does support wireless CarPlay and Android Auto. The joystick style shifter here, park is right there on top, unlock button over to the side. We then have a multifunction dial here. You rotate around to change the drive mode, and then we get really cool animations here on the infotainment system, just as you'd expect out of a vehicle with a fast processor in that infotainment system. Then inside the ring, we have 4 buttons here. We have a toggle for raising and lowering the air suspension. This button enables the crab walk mode, so I press it and hold it. Then we get this little message up here, and we have to time through that circle completing in order to engage crab walk mode. Then you'll see crab walk over here on the instrument cluster and that little crab icon just up there at the top. Then it will function. Moving back here again, the one on the other side, this is a future button. So once pressed, you'll see a message on that instrument cluster asking you to email your suggestions for the mode that might be on that button at some later date. We have 2 cup holders here, another closable door right there. If I get things off the center console, there's a small area with a rubbery mats to keep things from sliding around. And then oddly enough, a smaller storage area than I had expected for a vehicle with a flat battery pack. The likely reason for that is that there's a very large storage area right under the center console, and some of the components for the rear seat climate control system had to go somewhere, and that might be right there under that storage area. As we've seen in some other GM vehicles, this instrument cluster is very configurable. There are a number of layouts that you can choose from. So we have a lunar look there, we have a clean look. You see definitely good animations like we found in the infotainment system. There's a sportier look there. We also have a more off-road oriented look where it's going to give the roll and pitch information over there on that side. And then there's a digital look that is really clean. This is the second non-Cadillac to get Super Cruise, but unlike the Bolt EUV, this has the latest generation of Super Cruise on it. So it has the latest functions available that you'll find in the Cadillac lineup, including the automated lane change functionality. This little bar up here tells you the status of the system. It will light up red if you need to pay attention. It'll light up blue if it's available and green if it's in operation. This little module here is the facial monitoring system, so it makes sure that you're looking at the road. The steering wheel itself is definitely unique to the Hummer EV. Over here on the right side, we have the controls for that multifunction cluster over there, voice command button, phone button. Over here on this side, we have the buttons for the Super Cruise system, as well as the adaptive cruise control. On the back of the steering wheel is where we find the buttons, the toggle buttons right there for volume up, down, and track forward, backward. And then over here on this side, we have a teeny tiny little regen brake paddle. This is not adjustable regen braking for throttle liftoff, so you don't toggle through the modes like you might on a Hyundai or a Kia. Instead, you just pull it and it gives you more aggressive regen. So if you just want to slow down with that, you can do that. There's also one pedal drive, and over here with the shifter, you'll notice we have an L mode. If I put it in drive and put it in L, it's going to behave a little bit differently. If you're out on a trail, you would use L as sort of hill descent control, I guess, for the lack of a better word. This does not have hill descent control in the traditional sense. If you put it in L, it will take you to a stop and keep you there. And then you control your downhill progress simply with your right foot on the accelerator pedal. Obviously, since the Hummer EV is an off-road focused EV, Hummer decided that we had to come out here to Arizona and put this to the test on surprisingly narrow trails, I have to say. This is the kind of trail where I might think twice about taking a Toyota Tacoma, not because of the turning radius of the vehicle, which is absolutely excellent in the Hummer, as you can probably see in this Hummer right in front of me, but because of the width of the Hummer. This is a very, very wide vehicle. Again, just about 87 inches wide, not including the pretty wide mirrors that we have on this model. But on the other hand, it does prove that the turning radius is absolutely insane in the Hummer EV. It all has to do with that rear wheel steering. Right now, we're in the most aggressive rear wheel steering mode. That's what they call terrain by this little terrain management knob here in the center console. In this mode, at lower speeds, the rear wheels are actually steering more than the front wheels. It has the effect of feeling like you're sliding around a turn, only very, very slowly, because the rear swings out wider than you'd think. It really pays dividends on trails like this, though, because if there's, say, a rock over here and I want to make sure I avoid the rock, I can turn wide around it, then cut back in right as soon as the front tires have cleared it. And unlike a regular long truck where you just scrape all down the side of the vehicle, the rear end will actually pivot away from it and will actually give you a little bit more clearance than you might otherwise think. Now, it does mean that you have to be careful with the drive modes, because if you're doing that and you're not paying attention to the other side of the truck, you could always slide right into something on the other side that you might not want to otherwise slide into. The result is that this is a ginormous electric vehicle that weighs 9,200 pounds, but will turn tighter than a Chevy Spark. And in many ways, even though it turns tighter than a Chevy Spark, that doesn't really illustrate the entire benefit of this rear steering system. It has the ability to, again, pivot around some of these obstacles that a regular truck just couldn't. It also means that on some of the tighter sections of trail out here, where you're really seesawing the steering wheel back and forth, that you may end up overcorrecting yourself here, so you may end up swinging further than you want, have to swing back the other direction, and you can have this constant seesaw back and forth, which is not a problem at all out here. I think it's actually kind of fun. Now, rather unfortunately, I have not had the opportunity to test this back at home on our usual test track, so I don't have any official 0 to 60 or 60 to 0 numbers for you just yet. But you can expect two things. You can expect 0 to 60 to be absolutely insane and highly surface dependent. On good pavement, with tires that had been doing this repeatedly in relatively hot weather where traction should be good, 0 to 60 times were right around 3 seconds or so, and there were gobs and gobs of wheel spin. So if you put grippier tires on this, I suspect it would be well under 2 seconds, 0 to 60. I'm sure the internet will tell us exactly how fast this can go as soon as someone gets their hands on it, of course. But as far as 60 to 0 stopping distances go, those are probably pretty long, because the GVWR on this model is 10,550 pounds. And the payload is not terribly high. On this particular model, it's right around 1,000 pounds because we have the spare tires in the back there. Obviously, the curb weight and the tire choice is going to have an impact on on-road handling. If you're interested in more of an on-road focused Hummer, those are probably going to come a little bit later. At the moment, this launch edition vehicle, the Edition 1, this is really focused on off-road ability. A little bit later, there's going to be a longer range version with the dual motor setup that's probably going to give you over 350 miles of range. A lot of official specs are not out available on really any Hummer at the moment, so that's just a wild guess there. There has even been talk of perhaps a 400-mile range EV at some point. We do know that the Chevy Silverado EV should have a 400-mile range option with a battery pack roughly similar to this battery. Going after things a little bit out of order, let's talk about efficiency next. Over this day of mixed driving, we've been averaging a little less than 1 mile per kilowatt hour. That means that this is the first EV that could actually be rated in kilowatt hours per mile. Definitely an inauspicious award if you're looking for efficiency, but that's not really the goal of the Hummer EV. The mission of this vehicle is to be a super truck, the ultimate in off-road capability, sort of disregard any of the other considerations around. And that, of course, meant relative inefficiency. Anytime you put 35 or 36 or 37-inch tires on an off-road vehicle, have nearly 16 inches of ground clearance, etc., there are going to be efficiency compromises. There's just no way around it. And then you add the curb weight for everything else that this vehicle has on it, and you're in a place where efficiency is probably secondary to the mission. Now, admittedly, out here on this particular trail, we're not really able to assess the bounds of Hummer performance. This is not an overly technical trail, so be sure and stay tuned for some future videos where hopefully we'll be able to take the Hummer EV a little bit further off the beaten path. GM has integrated a lot of cool touches for off-roading, like the camera views that I dove into a little bit before, but let's take a look at them in a little bit greater detail. We have a front-facing camera there. You can also take a look at the back. You can have a rear view, a little bit broader screen there, a little broader screen front view there, so it's not quite as compressed. You can see the sides of the vehicle, front and rear. You can also see the hitch if you're towing something. That is another handy touch. The coolest views are these top-down views, however. We have under the vehicle, the top-down view right there, and then a different view from under the vehicle, so you can see forward and backward. This is sort of the tank look, so you can see exactly what you're going to roll over and then how you have rolled over whatever that might be. I will say that I wish these views were a tiny bit clearer, but the cameras can be cleaned, which is another cool touch. So this undercar camera, even though yes, it does get dusty, you can continually clean it, keep it in good visibility. But back to efficiency. Clearly this Hummer EV was not designed with that as the top priority, getting 47 mpge. But when you think about it, anything that gets 47 mpg anything is pretty good. And this is definitely more efficient than the previous generation Hummer, even if you do the back of the napkin calculations from what kind of fossil fuel it took to generate that much electricity if you were going to feed it off of such power sources. You could, of course, also feed your Hummer EV off of completely renewable sources and have a true zero tailpipe emission vehicle. I know a lot of people are very focused about the amount of energy expended in creating the battery pack and in the manufacturing plant, etc. Those are all solvable problems. So it is entirely rational to think of this as a vehicle that, even though it might not happen right now, in the future could be a true zero emissions vehicle. Ride quality out on this particular trail is a little bit lower than I had expected. I had expected something a bit cushier, but then I was reminded that we have 13 inches of suspension travel and double the curb weight that you find in some trucks. So that is important to keep in mind. With the curb weight this high, the suspension has to be a little bit firmer than some folks might want, but it is still pretty cushy for the kind of surfaces that we're on here. It is going to vary based on the drive mode that we're in. So on this particular road surface, normal is going to give us the cushiest ride. Off-road, interestingly enough, is a little bit more aggressive, a little bit firmer, and terrain sort of splits the difference but has very different tuning for the surfaces that you're going on. Also, something that adapts to the surface you're on is the way the drivetrain sends power around the electric motors. This has the sort of lock function in the rear, but it is not a true lock function. I will just pause here for a moment saying the rear steering is really helping out in this particular maneuver where we're going between these rocks. But the rear lock feature, it's not going to behave like a regular rear locker. It is going to feel quite different. The most interesting thing is that you'll still get wheel spin on one wheel in the rear as the software decides to direct power around. I have to say that for more rugged off-roading use like you might find on the Rubicon Trail, something like that, I would be interested to see how this would behave with a physical connection between the two electric motors in the rear. Say some sort of clutch pack that could be connected, so that way you have a solid axle connect basically in the back. We do not find that in this. We do find software that's going to imitate that in some respects, but not in every situation. Now, in this vehicle, it's probably less of a problem because this has 333 horsepower and well over 350 pound-feet of torque on each axle effectively. You can command a front lock of the front axle, so we have 333 horsepower and it can be sent to either tire or both tires. And in the rear, we have independent electric motors, and if one has zero traction, you're still going to be able to send 333 horsepower and about 350 pound-feet of torque to the other one. But on that front, how cool would it be to be able to send one tire in the back 666 horsepower? They could call that demon mode. As far as on-road driving manners go, the Hummer definitely feels big out on the road, but big in a different way to the average gasoline vehicle because, of course, there is so much power and so much torque that taking off from stoplights is absolutely effortless, as is merging onto the highway. But once you're on the winding mountain roads that you might want to get to your off-road destination, you'll notice the added heft of the vehicle. You notice that it's not going to handle like a lighter vehicle, like a half-ton truck in general terms. That's simply the trade-off for the electric drivetrain and the type of capability that we get here. Obviously, the all-terrain tires play into that a lot as well. If you were to swap these out for more regular truck all seasons, you likely would get better on-road handling. The only major complaint we had on the highway was wind noise. It is a little bit more pronounced than I had expected, but I would say that this vehicle also has the optional front lights that are just above the cowling here. Those likely are playing into some of that wind noise complaint, and it has a very blunt front end. Due to the battery pack's thickness and density, road noise is very well controlled, as are things that hit the underbody of the vehicle. So if you're really working those skid plates off-roading, some people just love to do that, they love to fall on a rock and skid along it, then you may not notice that as much in the Hummer, so you may have to be a little bit careful. If you're really rocking out to your tunes out on your favorite off-road course and you hit a really big boulder, you might not notice until it's a little bit too late. Now to the nitty-gritty. How much is the Hummer going to set you back? Well, this model is well over $100,000, especially as equipped with the optional spare tires back there in the rear. This also has a few accessories that we don't have complete pricing information on just yet, but you can bet that as you're looking at it here, it's over $110,000. Now, you will be able to get the tri-motor version very soon, but the one that's going to be available next is not going to be the same as this. It's going to be just a hair slower. That's going to start just a hair under $100,000, give you 830 horsepower out of very similar electric motors, and because it's not going to come with the same tires and same treatment as this model standard, the range is going to go up to about 300 miles. If you like the look of the Hummer but you want to spend less, there are going to be two different two-motor versions, at least so far that we know about. The least expensive of which is going to start around $80,000, and it's going to have a smaller battery pack than this, give you about 250 miles of range. That battery pack is not going to charge as quickly as this model. Definitely one thing to keep in mind. The Ultium battery pack, if you want to charge it at its fastest, it's going to have to be the biggest battery pack, and all the other battery packs will slot in somewhere below. When it comes to comparisons, honestly, there just aren't any because nothing like the Hummer exists. And that's one of the reasons that GM went in this direction first. They wanted to make a big splash on the EV scene and create something that was honestly, absolutely, positively insane. Nothing like this logically should exist, but I'm really glad that it does. This proves what can happen with electrification. You can make vehicles that are insanely fast, insanely off-road capable, and can do things that a gasoline vehicle simply couldn't. The ability for this vehicle to do what it can do across the rear axle especially is really, really intriguing. And this is logically a little bit lighter and a little bit less complex than a four-motor setup like we find in the Rivian lineup. What's perhaps more interesting to a wider audience is what the Hummer EV represents for upcoming GM electrified vehicles. Not just future Hummers and Hummer SUVs, but the upcoming Chevy Silverado EV and the Sierra EV, which are likely going to be less expensive than this. We already know that there is a much less expensive version of the Silverado EV planned, but it's going to share quite a bit of the structure and design and battery technology and motor technology that we see in this Hummer EV. General Motors has said that battery modules and motor modules have a lot of common componentry. So even though this electric motor is clearly designed for truck duty and the half shafts on this vehicle are absolutely insanely large, a lot of this is going to be rolled into future vehicles. So expect the Silverado to get perhaps a slightly less robust motor setup, maybe a slightly less robust half shaft setup, etc., because it's not designed for the kind of off-roading this Hummer EV is designed for. But it will have higher tow capacity ratings than this model. Be sure and let me know what you think about all that and what you think about the insanity of creating something like the Hummer EV, but this time, obviously, as an EV. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. Be sure and find me over at Facebook, Instagram, all those other social places, and I'll see everybody next week.